name is Peter Crone, commonly known as the Mind Architect, and I help people to transcend the deep constraints of the subconscious and discover a world of freedom.
Welcome to the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Danny Kennedy, and I'm here to help you become the very best version of yourself. Peter, welcome to the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast, mate. It is an absolute pleasure to be sitting and having a conversation with you. Firstly, just wanted to express my gratitude for your time and for you sharing your wisdom and knowledge with the audience, which I'm sure everyone is going to get a hell of a lot out of it. So thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
Mate, the three words, I don't know, they seem to be a very pivotal moment for you in your life. Are you able to explain to the listeners of the show as to why those three words gave you this sense of freedom and kind of exposed you to the power of energetics and what was truly possible for you in terms of having that feeling of freedom?
Sure. They occurred to me at a time in my life where I'd gone through a breakup with somebody, and as is the nature of the survival part of us, my mind was trying to figure out basically if I was going to be okay moving forward. Was I going to see this girl again? Would I have love like that again? And there was this sort of incessant talk track, which tends to be the inherent nature of the monkey mind that people have, where we're fundamentally just worried about our own existence. And those three words came to me because I realized that the actual truth of the answer to all of those questions was that I don't know. I don't know, in this case, if I would see this girl again. I didn't know if she was with somebody else already. I didn't know if I would find love like that again. And so all of the questions that were the genesis of my own suffering suddenly became moot. I realized, the actual truth to the answer of the questions that were keeping me up at night, figuratively and literally, was simply the nature of life itself, which is uncertainty. And for the first time in my life, subjectively, once I saw that, I realized that I've never known, but because as a human being, our brain is designed to predict and protect, I was always trying to work it out, right? What people might call control issues, or this incessant need to know what's going to happen, which is really a way of trying to garner a sense of security. And so once I saw that, that's just the nature of life. I couldn't deny the truth of my own revelation. And so there was just this immense amount of liberation that happened where I didn't need to know. And it didn't matter if I tried, I just still didn't. And so the truth in that stage of my life was true emancipation of the part of me that was trying to survive.
Yeah, I love that. And, I've heard you often refer to that kind of story within podcast interviews and whatnot around how post that realization, you had this energetic kind of freedom, I guess the word would be, but also kind of you opened yourself up to actually allow yourself to attract these things into your life that you were, that you wanted, but beforehand you had this guard up, or that you weren't energetically available for these things to be received. Like, for someone that's listening or watching at the moment, like, how does that kind of play out in day-to-day life? So for someone who has had this narrative or a story that's been conditioned within them since maybe they're a child, or a traumatic event that has happened to them, which has then led to them, basing their whole life off a bunch of actions or mechanisms to protect themselves. Are you able to explain a little to help the listeners understand as to how they're not energetically allowing themselves to attract the things that they say they want?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that part of them that may be preoccupied, trying to survive, trying to figure it out, not necessarily available to both the potential of themselves internally, but also the abundance of life externally. It's really the identity, how we perceive ourselves, like what we might call our personality, which gives rise to this personal reality that we call our life. The main issue with that is that the foundation of the identity, or what I just call the ego, is based in limitation, right? So some of them in the buckets of inadequacy, some sense of insecurity, some sense of scarcity. And so the idea of who people think they are is by design limited. And so it acts as this invisible barrier to both internal potential but external performance, right? So, and performance is a broad word, but it could mean your ability to perform in work, in skill, in sports, in relationships, whatever it might be. So that aspect of a human being by default, by design, is constrained. And so that's what I'm helping people to transcend, is to discover this world of complete freedom on the other side of this identity that we become misidentified with. Most people think they're this meat suit and all of their thoughts and beliefs, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just a very limited and small way of understanding ourselves versus the bigger self, capital S, which we could use the term spirit or soul or consciousness to point to, which is that you're a boundless, timeless being. But we collapse that with this idea of ourselves based on how we raised, the way we've been conditioned, the trials and tribulations we've gone through, the hurts and disappointments we've experienced, that accumulate to create this person that we think we are. And then that, ironically, becomes the very obstacle that we're looking to try and overcome. But nobody wants to get rid of themselves, right? So that's why it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, that self-sabotage that people, often talk about in different arenas of their lives, is an extension of the fact that who they are for themselves is limited. And so even on the precipice of great success, a better job, a wonderful relationship, whatever it is that we might crave, the sabotage is really that identity that its main preoccupation is to be right about its own limitation.
Right. I guess what comes with that, particularly when people start to, identify these blocks or the conditioning that's causing them to behave in certain ways, self-sabotage and whatnot, also requires a level of strength or, in particular, responsibility in terms of taking responsibility for their own actions, the things that are within their control and the choices that they have made, which is difficult at times. And, I've heard you refer to it once as, in order to grow, and, as a personal trainer myself and fitness coach, I can relate to this, that in order to grow, you need to lift heavy shit.
Yeah.
So the second part of that, once that identification has happened, is then being able to sit with that discomfort and go through those tough times and know that coming out on the other side that there is growth there. Like, is that something you see quite often, people coming to the realization that there are things that are blocking them, but then not being able to sit with that discomfort to come out on the other side of it?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think one of the biggest obstacles is not just the limitations themselves, which can be incredibly suffocating, but the fact that the design of the ego is that it wants to be right about its own perspective, right? You look at any relationships, whether it be intimate, romantic, family, international, between religions, the predominant undercurrent of most people's upset or disagreements is always based in the fact that somebody wants to be right. And if you have two people who want to be right, that means you're both, by extension, wanting to make the other person wrong. And so now you're in this argument or disagreement. This is when people fight, emotionally, certainly. So really, that's one of the biggest challenges, is that the foundation of the identity, which is based in, as I said, inadequacy, insecurity, scarcity, even though that's what we're here to transcend and to mitigate, to find freedom, its nature is to want to protect itself. When people get into arguments, if you were to judge somebody, most people's reaction is going to be, screw you, or no, I'm not, or I'm going to do whatever I want, right? So there's no listening, it's just a reaction. So the biggest struggle is, yes, the constraints themselves for sure are one aspect of the obstacle, but the other more insidious and slippery part of that is that who we identify ourselves with is constantly wanting to sustain itself by being self-righteous. So that's where a lot of people fall short, is that they can see that maybe for years they felt they're not enough. And that's obviously wonderful to notice and have awareness around, and it can certainly breed a little bit of freedom. But if you don't get beyond that part of you that feels it's not enough, wanting to find evidence that it's not enough, right? Someone gets fired or their girlfriend, boyfriend breaks up with them. It's like, oh, see, I told you I'm not enough. So there's always the opportunity for the ego to find whatever ammunition it needs to justify its own existence. And that really is the biggest, I feel, challenge for somebody who wants to transcend their ego, is to kind of almost notice that that's the pattern and make space for it. You don't have to fight it. A lot of people are like, oh, get rid of the ego. And that equally is, to me, an extension of the ego. Really, the ego wants to be held like a child that feels inadequate. So, yeah, it's, my work isn't for the faint of heart, but it's the most rewarding aspect of being human. And I would assert why we're all here, which is to discover true inner freedom and peace.
I love that. And I feel like so many people, and feel free to reframe this if I'm not saying it correctly, but so many people give their power to other people or to other circumstances every single day. When you look at it with some perspective, it's actually fucking insane when you think about driving in traffic, getting cut off by someone who you've probably never met before and you don't know their circumstances, but that one thing triggers a completely shit day full of negativity, and one thing leads to the other and you manifest more shit.
Yeah.
Like, what are some simple things that people can start to work on in order to, I guess, is it to drop the ego and to just become more present, or what are some things that people can do in order to get out of that pattern?
I think the first thing is awareness, right? To notice where those triggers happen when you get upset at a coworker, a boss, a spouse, a family member, a sibling, as you said, a stranger in traffic. It's really the opportunity for somebody to see where they're saying, albeit unconsciously, I'm not okay with what just happened, right? So that is that victim mindset. But when people really look at it, it starts to at least invite a little bit of inquiry as to, well, wait a minute, is that true that like my life is in danger, or I'm threatened because someone cut me off, or my wife said da-da-da? No, you start to realize the insanity of the fact that people are so easily upset. They're basically in reaction to circumstances, what it looks like. But what it's actually revealing at a deeper level is they're in reaction to their own perspective of how they think life should be. So that's the fundamental lie, is that the audacity of the ego is, I know how people should act, or I know how life should unfold. And when you really look at it that way and understand that that is the precursor to upset, you can't help but laugh at just the nonsensical nature that we think we know how everybody in the universe should be behaving. Right? It's sort of preposterous when you really look at it. Yeah. It's like, well, who the hell gave you the keys to the universe? I didn't get the memo that you're in charge of how everybody should behave, right? So when you just look at it that way, it gives them reprieve, and people can kind of, chuckle at their own insanity, that they're upset at what a coworker did or someone in traffic or whatever. It's like, really? Like, okay, like you're in charge of everybody's like choices. It's nonsensical. So then you start to at least find some freedom and realize, oh, okay, what is it in me at a deeper level that is being actually triggered, right? Somebody cutting you off in traffic is not the cause of somebody's frustration. That's just what happened, right? The cause of what creates frustration, anger, a reaction, flicking the bird to somebody, is that you already have a degree of unrest, hostility, dissatisfaction, unhappiness within you. And that was sort of just the quote unquote straw that broke the camel's back to help release it. So if anything, that person did you a favor, because you're not carrying some of that suppressed emotion. It gets expressed a little bit. And that's real where the gold is, to have that inquiry as to, what am I saying about this incident that caused me to have a reaction at a deeper level? And if I can discover that, then, I have the access to finding some freedom and peace of mind, where I'm no longer at the effect of what happens around me.
Yeah, so that frustration and the anger that comes out is almost like the symptom of the root cause.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, because someone cuts you off in traffic, maybe the choice in terms of responsibility is you're running late for a meeting and you're feeling stressed, and you interpret that event as potentially adding to the stress of you being late. Versus, let's say you go to the airport and someone's taking forever to get through TSA or to check in. But if you're there 2 hours early versus 45 minutes before your flight, you have a different feeling about this illusion of time, right? That's what's creating people's stress. So it always comes back to ourselves, and where can we own and be accountable for our own reactions? Now, most people don't want to have that. It's much easier to point a finger and blame, right? But what people don't understand is in that interaction of blame or judgment of another human, another one's behaviors, you're actually saying I'm powerless. You're unconsciously granting somebody the illusion of they have some say in your emotional state, right? If you really break it down, then you really go, whoa, I'm handing my power out to everybody like they control how I feel.
Yeah.
Which is another way for people to go, well, that's kind of dumb. First of all, it's not actually what's happening, even though that's the illusion that people think is happening. That's not the truth. Nobody upset you. You can say, oh, I'm really angry because so-and-so. No, you're really angry because you are choosing, albeit at a subconscious level, to generate an experience, an emotional reaction to what someone did. They didn't make you angry. Like, they don't have the puppet strings to your emotional well-being. Yeah. So when you see that, it's like, oh, well, that kind of makes a lot of sense. So then maybe you start to get this glimmer of power in terms of your own emotional well-being. And that's, for most people, is, that's a nice feeling of empowerment and responsibility. Otherwise, I'm just bouncing around life like a pinball, where somebody says something happens, I'm upset, I'm happy, I'm pissed, I'm angry, I'm whatever. It's like, it's exhausting.
Yeah. Fucking oath. The time illusion, that's something that I've really enjoyed hearing you talk about, or more so, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the psychological time illusion. So, spending a lot of time psychologically in the past, which is then causing reactions, or spending time thinking of future events which haven't even happened yet, which is also causing stress or depression in terms of the past situations and whatnot. Like, are you able to go into a little bit of detail on that in terms of what you mean by that?
Sure. It's part of the human experience. It's like even Einstein said, past, present, and future are persistent illusions, right? So there's no actual thing as a past, and there's no actual thing called a future. What we have is a perpetual state of presence. And then on top of that, we in language have the narratives that are past-based or future-based. But it's all occurring now. Mm-hmm. So I could, in my mind, as I'm talking to you, my mind could drift into, oh shit, I've got to do something by tomorrow. And that would, first of all, disengage me from the moment. So now I'm not fully present, which is what most people do entirely through their life, in their relationships and their performance. This is something I help athletes understand. If they're trying to perform, the best and only place they can do that is being fully present where they are. Yeah. But the mind, because especially the ego is based in psychological time, it has a history and it has a perceived future, but all of that only exists in linguistics. So when you understand that your future occurs now and your past occurs now, it's quite, for most people, it's actually quite shocking, because they really think, the things they want are in the future and the things that they regret are in their past. No, they're with them right now on both sides of the spectrum. So it's a little bit of a mind fuck, but it's a very powerful thing to understand that everything you're experiencing has to occur in present time. It's just to what degree are you engaged with your senses, with your current reality, or are you engaged with and giving attention to your thoughts and images of your mind, which are based in illusion of time. When we're in our minds, people can call it daydreaming or fantasizing or imagining. And at times that's appropriate, right? If somebody is walking into a new building where they're going to start a business, an office, or it's a new home where they're going to envisage how they're going to lay it out with furniture. We use the power of imagination and creativity to envisage something we're stepping into. But most people use that faculty of the mind as a means of worrying about a future, which is imagined, and then in present time trying to avoid the future that they just imagined. You just start to see how absolutely futile that is, right? It's one brain creates a future of worst case scenario, and then the one brain that imagined that future that's an illusion is now trying to think of methods of avoiding that made up future. And then again, you wonder why people are exhausted, need medication or alcohol. So that's the illusion of time. There's chronological time. The sun is at the center of the universe. We say the sun rises and sets, but it doesn't. But that 24 hours is a consistent linear time. And we are in progression with that. And the degree to which we're in harmony with chronological time is the degree that we are present. We can drift into our minds, but we're not drifting in time. We're drifting into perception of memories or imagination.
Yeah, that's really fucking cool. I like that. And I feel like the listeners and the viewers will take a lot out of that piece in particular.
Yeah, and if you in a real life situation, not to interrupt, but like when people struggle with fear and anxiety, this is why it's so powerful to understand. The fear and anxiety that they have occurs to them as though it's something in the future they're worried about, right? Mm-hmm. But when they get, no, your future happens now. So you're having your fear and anxiety now because you're having the thought now over something that hasn't even happened yet. You're literally making up your own anxiety, which is so powerful, right? Because if you really get that, you're no longer a victim of a potential worst case scenario that you think is out of your grasp or your control. No, you're literally generating your own emotions right now based on the lens that you're looking through. Equally, on the flip side of the same coin, you could say there's excitement. Excitement you're generating based, again, on a future proposition that hasn't happened yet, but it's a better case scenario or something you're, quote unquote, looking forward to. Mm-hmm. But that equally is an unknown. You're going back to the 3 words, I don't know what the fuck's going to happen, right? So that I don't know is the access to freedom. We can have intention. I'm prolifically creative. I'm building a lot of things, writing books, doing businesses. But I don't know to what degree they're going to happen, will be fulfilled, or on what timeline. I can have, a degree of commitment to something. Someone might say, I want to lose 20 pounds and I'm going to do it in 3 months. So now they've created an intention with a timeline, which is the most powerful way to do it. But now they come back to present time. They use that created future as inspiration for the actions that they take. So if people want to generate a new life or a future that they're inspired by, then yes, you use your imagination, you foresee it, you have a realistic timeline, and then you take actions to fulfill on that. But emotionally, to be powerful about it, it's living from that future already fulfilled, right? So if using the very common, I want to lose weight, which in itself in language is a very powerless way to say it. But let's say someone's 160 pounds and they want to be 140, then how would they feel? Why? What's the intention? Well, I'd feel healthier. I'd feel lighter. I'd feel more confident. Okay, great. We'll embody those qualities now. Yep. And then they are the stimulus or the inspiration for you to take actions that will automatically lead to that outcome that would be commensurate with the person who is 140 pounds, you see. Whereas most people perpetually push their future away because they think, well, I'm going to be happy when I make more money, which is saying I'm not happy now. That emotion of not happiness, unfulfilled, maybe even depression or resigned cynicism isn't a motivator to make money or to feel valued or to feel inspired to pursue your passions or your businesses, right? So most people are living the other way around. They're living from a history with evidence of why shit's not going to work for them, which only perpetuates that sort of malaise. And I'm saying, no, if you live from a future fulfilled, how would you feel? They'll be, well, fuck, that'd be awesome. Okay, great. Well, be awesome. And then that's what you will create. Yeah,
that's so powerful. That's so powerful. And when you look at how many people are living in that state of, you refer to it as dis-ease, and it's things that are causing stress, it's the reactions, it's the living in the future that hasn't happened yet because you're not in the now and whatnot. You often talk about how that is what over time accumulates to actual physical disease.
Correct.
Are you able to, I mean, I kind of understand that, but for
Yeah.
the listener that can't kind of put that together, are you able to kind of just go into a little bit of detail physiologically about how that kind of makes sense?
Sure. Yeah. So, depending on what age someone is, when we're younger, we have sort of better buffers. We have more capacity to heal. And so, when you're younger, usually also you're in an environment, hopefully, where the majority of your needs are met, right? You have a roof over your house, your parents provide food and security. But then as we go through into that adult phase, and now we're on our own, we feel it's incumbent upon us to survive, we get that very common state of stress, which is sort of a generalized expression for we are in a mild to sometimes severe state of fight or flight, which is I'm trying to survive. I'm trying to make rent. I feel the pressure to make my parents proud or to fulfill on a vision that my dad wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor or whatever it is. And that creates this angst and stress, which is the absence of ease, right? So that's dis-ease. So it always starts psychologically and emotionally. So basically our nervous system, which is the way that we relate to life, is creating an internal terrain that is hostile. Yep. So we're not feeling secure, held, reassured, at peace. And so what happens is when we are in sympathetic mode, which is to common vernacular fight or flight, which people would have heard. And again, it's a gradient, right? Like in terror and panic, you're literally fighting for your life, or that's how it occurs. There might not be someone trying to stab you, or there might not be a bear chasing you. But the feeling of the pressure of you might get fired or let go from work and you don't know how you're going to pay your mortgage can simulate the same feeling of terror. Now, when the body is in that state of fight or flight, which is a necessary faculty of being human, it's helpful at times, right? If, God forbid, you are in a bar brawl or you need to look out for yourself or you need to protect your kids or whatever it is, that's helpful to have. But when it's a consistent chronic state, then the body literally can't do any repair because you're dumping adrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol into the system, which has a cascade effect. So one of the side effects of being in fight or flight is there's no need to properly digest food, right? Digesting food, having had a beautiful freaking yogurt and fruit and like this beautiful sundae or whatever you had for breakfast, the body's like, okay, I don't have time to fully metabolize and digest that because the brain is telling me that we're in a threatening situation, which again, we're calling stress. So now what happens is our body, our physiology is dependent on nutrients, right? And the way that we obviously sleep, we heal, we nourish ourselves, and we get rid of waste matter and all of the things that sustain our vitality. So if the predominant way that we heal, which is through the foods that we ingest and equally mentally the things that we ingest, is turned off because our brain is saying we're in fight or flight, then you don't have to be a rocket scientist to recognize that eventually you're going to have a deleterious effect on your ability to replenish tissues and to have vital cell replication so that you can maintain the quality of your own physiology, right? So if you're in a constant state of stress, you don't digest, your sleep is going to be impaired, your cell replication and rejuvenation is also impaired. So yeah, if you're robust and you're built like a brick shit house and an ox, then fine, you might get away with it for a while. If you have a more fragile constitution, then symptoms of sickness and disease are going to manifest quicker. And this to me is what we see over time is that cascade of living chronically to varying degrees in a state of fight or flight because the brain is telling you that life is dangerous or you're in a position of threat because you don't feel like you're enough or you're not going to be okay. Then eventually it is just physics that your body has to show the wear and tear of not being given sufficient time, rest, and peace to heal itself. And so that is, why I'm so passionate about health because, I work with a lot of people who have plenty of resources. They might even have their own personal trainers. They might have chefs. They can buy good quality organic food. They live in a nice home that's safe in a nice neighborhood. There's nothing really for them to quote unquote worry about. But because of these deep-seated constraints of fear and inadequacy, insecurity, they're not enough, whatever it is, they're in a mild state of self-consciousness as it relates to what do other people think about me? Am I going to be okay? Am I keeping up with the Joneses? And so they have externally all the trappings, but internally they're at war with themselves. And that will eventually manifest in, obviously, the myriad of different sicknesses that people experience. So hopefully that helps people understand.
100%. Yeah, I think it's a big wake-up call for a lot of people. And sometimes just hearing it or seeing it like that kind of allows people to really get a grasp of how important it is to work through these things. And, my producer, Kane, and I were talking before the show. We're both big sport fans, basketball, combat sports, all that type of stuff. And Kane had a really good question that I wanted to throw at you. So for someone like Mike Tyson, right? So he has a pretty rough childhood, grows up in an environment which is quite stressful, and there's a lot of trauma and whatnot. And obviously in the middle parts of his life at this point anyway, there's a lot of, getting locked up. There's the all the stuff that he gets in trouble for, and it kind of shows itself in terms of the trauma that he's been through and the conditioning as a child. Like, if you were to work with Mike Tyson before all this bad shit kind of happened in his life in terms of him acting out and whatnot, what are some of the things that you would have done in order to hopefully prevent a lot of the negative stuff that has happened throughout Mike Tyson's life?
I mean, it's all hypothetical, so, just want to speak to that first. When you look at someone like that, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that he is quite literally a fighter.
Yeah.
So fighting as a physiological response is a mechanism. It's a maladaptive way that the person is trying to survive a perceived threatening environment.
Mm-hmm.
So in his case, it gave him a career, right? But at what expense? All the drama, all, the misdemeanors, God knows what in relationships, loss of finances, loss of cognitive health. He's obviously taken a few punches and whatever drugs he's done. So his internal terrain is literally, he's at war. Now, when somebody is scared and they are a fighter, they are equally dangerous. Now, you put them in a ring with somebody else versus me, I probably wouldn't stand a chance. I mean, I'm pretty adept. I'm a good athlete, but I'm more likely to win a fight out of helping somebody discover their own love, right?
Yeah.
That's more my methodology. I've never been in a fight in my life. So with someone like that, he would have to see that his environment that he grew up with trauma and all of the hardship he went through as a kid, the absence of love, the absence of recognition, acknowledgement, and value is what left him literally in a state of perpetual survival. And so anybody who's on the streets, in the ring, doing UFC is usually they are the byproduct of a very hostile environment as a child. And that's the way they learn to survive. But anytime you're fighting or even resisting life, you are in a state of deleterious cost to your own vitality and well-being.
Yeah.
It might serve a purpose. You might become the bully in high school for a minute because you're bigger and you've learned to be a tough guy, but only because you're having to sustain that abusive environment at home. But at the end of the day, it's always going to be at your own loss.
Yeah.
Because you can't sustain that. You can't be in a perpetual state of fighting life without there being some really deleterious impact, that's just sad, honestly, for most people.
Yeah. And I guess always in a constant state of feeling like you need to seek validation through your actions instead of just being able to accept or give love naturally without having to do something for it in that case.
Yeah, that too. And that could be sort of like the slightly less invasive version of fighting, right? Where maybe a kid isn't in a hostile environment, they weren't hit, they weren't disciplined, but maybe they weren't noticed or acknowledged. And so they felt that whatever they did was never sufficient, which can breed that mindset of not enoughness. And so there can be this constant striving to prove oneself, which itself is also exhausting, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, at the end of the day, you're always battling your own perception of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's never the demon out there. It's always the way that we are relating to ourselves, which is a blind spot. This is why there's compassion. You know, people are literally oblivious to that which they're oblivious to, right? So you can't have judgment. Somebody knows, for example, they shouldn't smoke cigarettes in this day and age, but they're still addicted, whether it's now predominantly physiologically, but before it was because they had so much angst and anxiety that they needed that nicotine to just get some relief. But they don't know why they really struggle with anxiety and feeling uncomfortable in their own skin. So they know consciously that they shouldn't smoke, but they don't know what at the subconscious level created that habit. Well, because they're scared, they feel hurt, and they don't know the story around that no one loves me, I'm worthless, right? And if you live inside of that mental prison, then you are going to feel the ramifications of that and seek relief however you can. Nicotine, weed, alcohol, food, sex, whatever it is. So that's where I think with this work, I always start with a lot of compassion that people are doing the best they can within the level of awareness that they have. So Mike Tyson was one of those people who's blind to his own deep-seated constraints, just learned to survive and literally fend for himself, albeit with great cost. He carved out a career, fine, he made some money, but to what degree is that a fulfilling, purpose-filled life? I mean, he's maturing now. Maybe he's starting to see some of the, underlying currents that drove that, and he's finding love and peace and acceptance. But yeah, I mean, this is how most people live their life, right? They are in a constant state of fight or flight to whatever degree.
Before we move on, because I really want to get you to explain this example of an athlete in particular that you've worked with that I found is super interesting. But just before I move on to that, to wrap up this part, so for someone that does have that trauma or that conditioning, someone like a Mike Tyson or whatever, they might be a CEO, they could be whoever the fuck it is, and they start to see this level of success and they start to get money and they start to materialistically see benefit of expressing whatever it may be. How difficult is it for someone like that to then take that step back and actually work through the trauma and the conditioning to realize that maybe what they've just made a living off, even though it's come off the back of trauma or conditioning, is not actually helping them in the long run, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And it depends on the individual, right? It's hard to answer specifically, but it depends on where does somebody put the emphasis of success. When somebody comes from a traumatic background where there might have been a lot of poverty or scarcity, and they've learned through, albeit maladaptive ways, to cope as a fighter in life, maybe to the degree that some people cheat, they lie, they cut corners just to make it. And they start to garner the trappings of that behavior where they can buy the fancy car, they can throw money around at a strip joint, they get the women or the guys if it's a girl doing it, or they feel this sense of internal worth based on their external superficial success. Mm-hmm. That can be very hard to undo because they're collapsing power, status, and value with what they've accumulated. But to me, then that's when you see people go into depression, midlife crisis, when usually around that age of 30, could be maybe 40, depending on the sport, you retire. And so now where all of that value was associated in terms of your recognition, you're a professional athlete, you go into this feeling of worthlessness again, which never went anywhere, was always underneath the surface, but it was mitigated or hidden by virtue of the external illusion of success. So that can oftentimes be the comeuppance of somebody where they're like, okay, shit, now that I have done all of this, but I still feel empty. I mean, David Duval in golf, he won the British Open and went into severe depression because even though that was something he had aspired to, he realized, oh, but now what, right? Like that didn't complete him, right? So it is up to the individual at what time they have usually some kind of crisis. That's sadly what most people need. Is they need to have that dark night of the soul before they re-evaluate what is real success. And to me, real success is to be totally at peace. Now, the irony is, when you're totally at peace internally, you tend to be somebody who attracts the external trappings. So you can have it all. But if you get the trappings without the internal peace, at some point, whether it's this lifetime, the next, or if you want to get poetic about it, you have to face the music. That's not success. It's a facade that can, sustain internal lack for a while, but it can't be. It's not perpetual, right? It doesn't fulfill the whole. Like, that's why one of the most prevalent words in marketing is more, right? Like, if you're watching an infomercial and they're like, wait, there's more, right? If you're the first 500 callers, you'll get the free fucking toaster or whatever it is. Like, more is like that ultimate temptation for the ego, which is based in lack.
Yeah.
But it's the ultimate void that can't be fulfilled. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
A certain basketball player that you worked with had a fucking horrendous free throw percentage in terms of the average in the league. And I remember hearing you talk about the process you worked through in terms of helping him get out of his own head and come back to that present moment and stop, shooting his free throws based off past results and whatnot. Are you able to just quickly explain, I guess, how that process plays out, whether it be for a basketball athlete or a golfer or for whatever it may be, someone who has either had success and in a bit of a slump, or someone who is just kind of far too deep in their own consciousness that is affecting their present performance? Yeah,
it's that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So one of my quotes, I say, past hurt informs future fear. So in this case, with this athlete or any athlete who's had a series of what they will interpret as failures, disappointments, then it's only natural that we are concerned for the continuation or repetition of that. Right? So it doesn't have to be sports. Anyone could look at, okay, they had a bad breakup and then they had another bad breakup. Going into that next relationship, there is, by nature of being human, no one's going to begrudge them the concern that, is this person going to be a bad breakup too?
Yeah.
So we tend to live our life kind of looking over our shoulder. Now, for an athlete, that's kryptonite, right? Because, as I said earlier, the only place an athlete has power to perform is in the present moment. But if much of that athlete's attention is based on past failures, then you're already compromised in your ability to perform now because you're not using all of your faculties. Let's say, as every human being has, to within their capacity, 100% ability to be present, right? And that might vary. Someone's presence might be a little bit compromised versus someone else's presence. But 100% presence is the greatest precursor to at least you having the best outcome possible for you, right? But if an athlete is 50% present, because they've got 40% on their history that hurt and now 10% for the concern of the future of that being fulfilled again, they're operating literally at half of their capacity, which is that self-fulfilling prophecy. So with this particular athlete, I helped him understand the futility of that mechanism of trying to survive, which is really the little child who doesn't want to disappoint. In his case, earning millions of dollars, millions of fans watching, a lot at stake. His performance was oftentimes the differential in a win or a loss, right? If he was at the free throw line 10 times and he missed 8 of those and only made 2, but they lost the game by 3 points, him even just getting 4 more would have meant winning by 1, right? So, and that's not a crazy average to get 6 out of 10. That's still below average, but it would have been the difference. So then there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of embarrassment. So we had to incorporate his history and find profound acceptance for he has, to this point, done what he's done. Now, when people have histories that are littered with trials, tribulations, disappointments, and failures, they end up trying to fix their history, which means they're constantly living in it. So I often make the joke of like Men in Black when, Will Smith and what's his name? I can't remember the actor's name, but
Tommy Lee Jones.
Sorry, what's that?
Tommy Lee Jones.
Tommy Lee Jones, yeah. So whenever they would wave that black wand in someone's face after they'd seen the aliens, they had no memory of that. So the joke that I say with people, especially my athletes, is giving them the conscious form of memory loss, right? So it's like a form of Alzheimer's, not to belittle or make fun of that disease. It's awful, but where there's no sense of history anymore.
Yeah.
You're no longer being defined by what happened. You're just, well, I'm here and I don't know what's going to happen. So it's that combination of the, I don't know. Am I going to go 9 for 10 from the free throw line, or I'm going to go 0 from 10? All those possibilities exist in the quantum field. But what am I gravitating more towards? As I said earlier, am I living from this is all going to work out, it's going to be awesome, which generates a feeling of ease and relaxation in the moment, which for an athlete is the precursor to better performance.
Yeah.
And so it becomes self-fulfilling that way. Conversely, if I'm concerned about a future, then in present time, I'm going to have tension and stress, which changes my biomechanics, which as an athlete who typically does well when they're relaxed, means I'm going to have a compromised result, which is equally self-fulfilling. So you start to see, regardless of what you're focused on, it's freaking powerful. Yep. If I think that it all works out, then in present time, I tend to be in a state of ease, which then tends to fulfill on a good outcome. If I'm worried that it's not going to work out, then I'm in a state of dis-ease, and that equally tends to fulfill on the tension and the angst that I've got in my body, which doesn't allow me to perform freely.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I mean, I don't know if you're all over this situation or not, but someone like obviously him being Australian, it really intrigues me. But someone like a Ben Simmons, to me, it's super interesting to see what work like that would be able, like what effect that would have on someone like Ben Simmons at the moment, who is obviously an extremely good athlete and basketball player, but is in what seems like a serious mental slump and kind of playing far too much on his own.
I'm not familiar. I haven't seen what he's doing or not doing. Right. But yeah, that's the thing. I didn't grow up playing basketball. I certainly didn't play out playing baseball, and yet I've worked with God knows how many major league baseball players. I didn't ride horses. I helped one of my show jumpers get a gold. It's like it's irrelevant to what they're doing because it's all what's going on between the ears, and that's why. For me, particularly, it's so fulfilling to be able to help people from all walks of life, because when you understand the mechanics of how the mind works and what it means to be human, and that we're by design wired to try and survive, once you can overcome that, then you're just free.
Unreal. Mate, I'm very conscious of your time. I've just got one more question for you, if that suits you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Things like, let's say, meditation, affirmations, all that type of stuff, obviously are of benefit for people in certain situations and whatnot. I've often heard you speak about how, although people may feel like they're, mentally in a really good place and they're doing X, Y, and Z, whether it be meditation, journaling and ice baths and all the rest of it and whatever it may be.
Yeah.
The fact that they are having to do that on a daily basis in order to feel good is still meaning that they're at a level of dis-ease or they're not at their natural state. So for someone like yourself, who has obviously done a lot of this work and teaches this and helps people with that, I'm intrigued to hear like what type of things you do, if any, on a daily or weekly basis in order to continue to stay that level of self-awareness and work through blocks or things that may come up for you if you are doing forms of meditation and whatnot. Like what does a kind of typical day look like for you in that regard?
Sure. I do all the above to varying degrees. I don't like taskmaster myself in terms of like I have to do this and got to do that, because that would be coming from that state of dis-ease. The way I look at it is, if people can pay attention to why are you doing something, right? That's the underlying intentionality that drives behavior. So if somebody's meditating, using affirmations, working out, because there's some underlying agenda, in lay terms, well, I'm doing this because, then you've got to look at what's the because, right? So if somebody, for example, is going to the gym because they feel that they're overweight, they're out of shape, and they're fat, That seems like a good choice and an appropriate behavior for the current condition they're in, but it's probably not going to be sustained, or they're going to revert back to the thing they're trying to get away from, because the mechanism they're using is they're being driven by judgment, right? They're saying, I am something that I don't want, so I'm going to try and do something to get rid of that. So then they're in conflict with themselves. So I invite people to look at, are you trying to get away from something, or are you trying to work towards something? So for me personally, I'm not trying to avoid anything, get away from something. I'm just taking care of, and most of my behaviors are, I'm taking care of my physicality, my machinery. Not because I want people to think I'm cool, I look sexy, I've got a six-pack and people will like me, or it's just I am, through my own perceived self-worth, I make choices that are commensurate with somebody who values themselves, right? So if you look at something more objective, like a car, if somebody has a car they couldn't give a shit about, then they probably haven't changed the oil for months, maybe years. The tire pressure might be off. The inside might have old wrappers, Chinese cold takeaway food. Who knows what's in there, because they're not perceiving that particular object with any sense of worth. And so there isn't the associated TLC that would go with that, right? Taking care of it. So for me, the most pivotal part of any kind of daily routine, if it's going to be one, sustainable, two, impactful, it has to be based in genuine self-worth. Otherwise, people are choosing behaviors trying to compensate for a deeper feeling of lack. And that can never be fulfilled. You might get glimpses. You might lose a bit of weight, feel sexier for a minute, and then you feel good about yourself. But it's like whack-a-mole, you know, where something will pop up in another area of your life. It's like you feel good about your body, but now somebody else got the promotion at work and you didn't. You're like, fuck, you know, I knew I wasn't doing good enough. And now they focus all their attention on trying to become better at work, and then their health gets compromised, you know? So it's like, I'm the center of my universe, and my state of being as I relate to myself it's unfuckable with, right? Like who I am is at its very deepest core. It's a expression of truth for me. It's not something that varies. Then around me, my health, my body, my relationships, my wealth, my business, those all will oscillate and go through cycles. Most people have it the other way around, where internally at the deepest level, they don't have a sort of sense of self-worth that is based in true fortitude. And so they're trying to manage the circumstances of their life to garner that. And that's futile and exhausting. But if I am this pillar of consistency in the way that I have my qualities and my values of freedom, of love, of peace, of worth, and I function from that place, then not only do I tend to get better outcomes, but if I, for example, have a slow day, I'm tired from travel, I don't have any internal dialogue of disdain or self-abuse that I didn't do something. It's just I'm present with the circumstances of my life. I've traveled across country. I've been speaking to audiences. I've worked with clients, and I'm a little tired physiologically. So rather than berating myself that, oh, you didn't work out, you've got to meditate, you've got to do this, it's like, no, how about you put your feet up, take a nap? Or maybe in this case, I would lie under a red light as a form of, you know, stacking both rest, but with something that I know is good for me. So that's my invitation to people, is to really look at what's the underlying intention. Are you trying to compensate for something that you feel is an inadequacy that is really based in judgment? Or are you genuinely curious to explore your potential and your capacity as a human being out of the true joy of exploring what it means to be you?
That's epic. Mate, Peter, I've absolutely fucking loved this conversation, and I genuinely could just sit here and just chat with you all day, which unfortunately you've got shit to do, and so have I, so that's not going to happen. But mate, I appreciate your time. Are you coming to Australia anytime soon?
I don't know. I'd love to. I tend to be in a position now where I'm not such a huge fan of travel, so it tends to have to be something that's an invitation. I did just get an invitation to come and speak in New Zealand, so we'll see if that pans out. But yeah, I tend to sort of my travel tends to be dictated by invitations and opportunities to make a difference. So I'd love to. I lived in Sydney for a couple of years, two of my favorite, happiest years of my life. We had a lot of fun. So it'd be great to get down there again sometime.
Brilliant. Well, we might have to see what we can do. Try to organise something.
Yeah.
All right, mate. Thanks so much. And for everyone who has tuned into this episode, whether you're listening to it or watching it, firstly, we really appreciate it. And secondly, if you've taken some value, we'd love for you to take a screenshot of this episode, share it on your social media, tag myself, tag Peter, keep up with his great work, and check out all his other extremely valuable content. And hopefully we get to chat again at some point, mate, and maybe even see you in Australia.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Danny.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
Welcome to the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Danny Kennedy, and I'm here to help you become the very best version of yourself.